Mr. Brendan Lee, Chief Executive Officer of the Council for Private Education, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's really with great pleasure that I join all of you this morning because I think that this is an important conference. It's going to set the tone and direction for private education going ahead. And it's important because we would like everybody to be on the same page. And the fact that all of you are here shows your keen interest in the area and a desire, I think, to make sure that we go forward in the same direction. So I would like to thank all of you for taking the time off to come here and be part of this conference. When the Private Education Act was introduced 3 years ago, it was a particularly challenging time for the sector. At that time, the sector had experienced a few years of rapid expansion with large growth in student enrollment, but unfortunately, the lack of a strong regulatory framework to accompany the rapid growth allowed the entry of some fly-by-night operators into the sector. The proliferation of unscrupulous practices and sudden school closures threatened to bring the entire sector into disrepute. The government therefore had to act to protect the interests of students and also to safeguard Singapore's reputation in education. And we had 3 objectives. The first was to ensure a basic level of protection for students, including the safeguarding of course fees. Second, to raise the quality of providers to meet a minimum standard in their academic processes and corporate governance. And third, to improve access by consumers to information on providers and courses. And I'm glad to note that the sector has now achieved the baseline standard in all 3 areas. You will hear more about this progress and the latest state of the sector in the next address by Brendan, but these improvements will not come by easily. They are the result of the combined efforts of the Council and industry. So thank you all for the hard work that you've put in so far. As we move into the 4th year of the new regulatory regime, what can the industry expect? What is the long-term direction? We've made much progress, and the private education sector today is quite different from what it was 3 years ago. But as you may have deduced from the theme of this conference, we still need to build on the foundation that was laid over the past few years and to do more. I would like to share today 3 points on how we can make a real and sustained difference to quality in the sector. The first is expanding our measures of quality to include student outcomes. Our regulatory framework currently centers on the quality of governance and processes. The Council will work with the industry to ensure that the threshold standards that have been achieved do not slip. We will also fine-tune the regulations to increase their effectiveness while being mindful to avoid imposing an unnecessary burden on institutions. But beyond ensuring quality governance and processes among private education providers, real quality improvements in the sector can only be achieved if we start looking at the performance of providers in terms of student outcomes. What knowledge and skills have graduates of private education institutions gained through their studies? How satisfied are they with the education received? And did they meet their goals for enrolling in these courses? Without the answers to these kinds of questions, there's insufficient basis for us to ascertain the true quality of private education and to identify areas for improvement. For these reasons, we would like, eventually, to see private education institutions demonstrate the ability to attain positive student outcomes. I say eventually, as this won't be an easy task, and it will take time to achieve. There are several issues that we will first need to resolve. For example, there is currently no clear consensus on the desired outcomes from private education. Are institutions responsible only for ensuring that their students successfully complete their programs? Or should they also be held accountable for employment outcomes of their graduates? Even if we reach a consensus on the outcome measures to be used, Whether and how such measures could be incorporated into our regulatory framework will also require further consultation with the industry, employers, and other stakeholders. So, there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. But I hope that all of you who are here representing private education institutions will start considering how you might measure outcomes for your students and use this as a basis to spur quality improvements in your programs. The second point relates to prioritizing the interests of students in private education provision. There is a limit to what can be prescribed through regulation. We believe that improvements to the sector can only be sustained if the institutions place the interests of students at the heart of all that they do. A recent report on the for-profit higher education industry in the United States illustrates how a purely profit motive can lead to severe repercussions for students and the industry. The report, a result of a 2-year investigation on for-profit colleges by a US Senate committee, highlighted high dropout rates, high fees that were not commensurate with returns to students, lack of student support, and misleading marketing on the success of graduates. Such practices were clearly aimed at growing student enrollment and revenue, but with little regard for the welfare of students. Although not all institutions were guilty of the same practices, the widely publicized report had damaged the credibility of the entire sector in the US. We hope that for private education institutions in Singapore, educational responsibilities will take primacy over other goals. While institutions can justifiably seek to increase enrollment, they should ensure that students that they admit are able to benefit from their programs and provide appropriate support to help students complete their studies. As we continue to strengthen consumer education, prospective students will also be more discerning of institutions with good educational practices. Institutions that are not student-centric will lose out in the longer term to those who are. Finally, I would like to encourage the industry to initiate and lead efforts that can contribute towards raising quality in the sector. Industry players are well placed to understand the latest sectoral trends and to review current practices. They can complement the role of government in regulation by developing industry guidelines that work in parallel with legislative requirements. Such guidelines need to be evolved rapidly to respond to industry feedback, contributing towards a more flexible regulatory environment for institutions in the longer term. Industry can also play a key role in building capability for the sector. Existing efforts, such as the launch of the Specialist Diploma in Applied Teaching and Learning offered by Republic Polytechnic to address a gap in pedagogical training, have thus far been led by the Council. I note that the newly formed Singapore Association for Private Education is embarking on joint initiatives with the Council to uplift capabilities. We are optimistic that such collaborations between industry and government will play an increasingly important role. In conclusion, I would say that this inaugural conference is a first step in bringing together key stakeholders to develop a shared understanding of the quality imperative for the sector. The business of education involves the shaping of lives and the promise of a chance for individuals to fulfill their aspirations. We know that many students take up private education with the hope of advancing their prospects for further studies or their careers. We need all of you from the private education institutions to recognize the impact that you have on students' lives and to deliver on the promises that you have made to them. The duty you have to your students must go beyond purely contractual obligations, especially given the significant investment of time and money that many of your students make in pursuing educational offerings that you provide. On its part, the Council will continue its efforts in raising the quality of the private education sector and its institutions. So, let me wrap up by thanking you all very much for giving me the opportunity to be here and also for the commitment that you have shown in being here. So I wish you all a fruitful conference, and that the sector going ahead will flourish and be able to deliver all the outcomes for not just the institutions, but for the students as well. Thank you very much.